Swedenborg does assert that there have been changes in the human race, what it's like to be a person, how the body works, everything like that.
Yeah.
And he says
right.
so he lays it out, he often talks in terms of churches, which are these sort of spiritual phases of the human race and ways of thinking and feeling about life. He talks about the earliest church, and this not just being a specific religious organization, but this is sort of the conglomerate of spiritual practices the world over.
Yeah, right.
And he talks about how that first church was a heavenly church, which in Swedenborg parlance, I believe, means they were will-driven. So feelings led them to do things, but those feelings were charitable or good to the neighbor and non-selfish and all that kind of stuff. Right? That's
right.
pretty close. And
yeah.
And they were represented by actually a very famous Bible story. Adam and Eve.
Ah, yes, that's right. Adam and Eve represent, Swedenborg says, not two individuals who lived way back when, our sort of aboriginal parents, but they actually represent our original state of existence. And then, if you follow the story in Genesis, their descendants sort of go downhill pretty quickly, and Swedenborg says that represents a state of spiritual decline that I imagine actually unfolded over thousands of years or something. But it was their descendants represented this decline.
And so that decline led us out of that most ancient church into what Swedenborg calls the ancient church. And he says the ancient church was spiritual rather than heavenly, which you might think of spiritual as so great, but it's actually a bit of a step down.
Right.
It's where no longer can you, I don't just walk into a room and say oh, I want to share my cookies with Dr. Jonathan Rose because I think he would like them. It's more like, oh, I really want these cookies, but I know I should do this, and if I was him, I think it through and realize, okay, it's the right thing to do.
Exactly, that's good.
This was symbolized by Noah and his descendants.
Yeah, so the flood, Noah's, famous for his flood.
Yeah, he kind of rode that wave, no pun intended.
And the flood, Swedenborg says, corresponds to massive changes that happened in humanity, in the way that the mind functions, even the way that the human body worked.
So not a literal flood happening, but...
That's right, not just a whole bunch of water.
But a representation of this thing that happened to us. And we could talk for a whole hour about that. We did actually see our episode, The Meaning of Noah and the Flood, for more about that. To summarize it, according to Swedenborg, there were these major changes, not only in the mindset of the human race that when this flood catastrophe happened, but also in how their physical bodies worked. And I find that's impossible to believe. Do you have any evidence that Swedenborg made such a claim?
What evidence could there be? I mean, I can imagine a mindset changing over time, even in our lifetimes, you see that kind of thing, but not how the physical body. Well, what evidence could there be? Does Swedenborg say anything about this?
Let's just put up a random quote.
Okay, yeah. Here we go. The earliest church had enjoyed a perception of goodness and truth, but what the world does not yet know, says Swedenborg, and may have difficulty believing.
Okay, so put your seatbelt on.
Yeah, because when Swedenborg says that, it's really going to get interesting, is that the people of the earliest church breathed internally. Any external breathing was silent. Like you could hardly tell. He talks about this sort of tacit or silent breathing where there's hardly any exchange of air, and actually the exchange is going on a deeper level that keeps you alive. It's bizarre.
And so not just they had different religious systems, not just that they had a different way of thinking, there was a noticeable physical difference.
Yeah, the actual way they breathed was different.
Okay, well, why wouldn't we want to read more at this point? This is, again, from 607. As a result, they also spoke less with words than people afterward did and still do. So they still spoke, but just not as much. They were the opposite of you and I.
Maybe in an analogy, like little children, who just have a few words that they say, but most of it is different.
Right. Instead, like the angels, they spoke in ideas or mental images, which they could communicate by endless changes in facial expression, especially around the lips. This part of the face has countless series of muscle fibers that today cannot work separately, but in those times were independent of each other.
Almost as if what is now just one sort of solid wall of muscle used to have, all this variation that you could do within it.
I think of the difference between a prehensile tail and just a regular tail. I mean, one can it's almost like a digit can grab things and do things. Using these muscles, they were able to display, signal, and represent their ideas in such a way that what we would now need an hour to express in articulated sounds, aka words, would have taken them a minute.
Now that's crazy to think. Not only did they have a different way, but their way was better, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like when I come and say, Jonathan, don't you think instead of using this word, you should translate this? And you're like, should I? And I'm like, okay, that means don't you know who
But
I
imagine
am?
being able to do this whole show with a single facial expression, right?
Yeah. Oh,
know?
man, I'm sure there's somebody watching who's like, couldn't we just do that? Couldn't we cut out 90% of these
Save
words?
us all the time.
And they conveyed their message to the grasp and real comprehension of those present much more fully and clearly than words or sentences could ever do.
Wow. I know language is sort of a trap, but still it's amazing to think of that really efficient language.
This may seem impossible, and yet it is true. There are also many others, let's just throw something in here, not from this planet, who spoke and still speak in the same way.
I guess it wasn't weird enough. He had to throw that in there.
So
interesting to think of that he's saying that on other planets they still practice this internal breathing, but we've gone all external.
Is there anything that connects this to experience? I wonder, is there a vestige of this in the way that the faces of little kids are?
Yeah, right. Thinking of that example of infancy with just a little language, but also little children make so many amazing faces. In fact, I found if you take a picture of a newborn this hour and then the next hour and then the next hour and the next hour, they look like 4 different people. It changes so rapidly and their faces change so much.
It's so true. Not long before we were doing this episode, I saw a picture of my daughter when she was very, very young and just looks like a totally different person in just that photo.
Amazing.
And so they maybe have this greater range of facial movement. Let's get back now, because we talked about face stuff, but we were talking about breathing and the changes there.
Breathing,
so let's see where he goes on that.
In fact, I've been able to learn about this internal breathing of theirs, what it was like and how it changed over time. Since their respiration was like the respiration of the angels who breathe in a similar way.
Oh, look at that. So he's saying we used to mirror more closely what's going on in heaven.
So angels breathe a certain way. I wonder if we will ever learn to breathe that way. And then they were able to, it says they had access to the deeper, let's see, where does it go? Swedenborg continues, concepts involved in thought and were capable of a kind of perception that could never be described. So this really helped them get a better understanding. If its nature were described, even if it were described, okay, so you wrap language around it, which Swedenborg is constantly trying to do, no one would understand it, and therefore no one would believe it, because in Swedenborg's life and mind, understanding and belief go together.
Yeah, so, and it seems like that's a good lesson for us to remember, that we're trying to describe these weird things, and we have pictures of them, but we probably don't get them as they really are.
Yeah.
We're just pointed in that direction.